Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Today marks the 500th Moment of Truth morning briefing. Now, as many of you know, I don't celebrate things like subscriber milestones and such, not because I don't appreciate my subs, but because for me, after 15 plus years, this isn't like McDonald's where you keep a sign up saying billions and billions served. But I do think it worth noting that today marks the 500th daily briefing that I've been privileged to give to you. I thank you for having listened for all these years. I try to make sure that the things I brief you on are not only timely, but also prescient, looking toward the future. It is a core tenet of my belief system that any so-called news or commentary outlet is absolutely worthless if it can't tell you when something's coming before it gets there. I told you about the influence of AIPAC only a couple of weeks before the war in Israel broke out, and people saw firsthand what AIPAC's influence is. I told you about the U.S. trying to take Venezuela's oil, and this week detailed how the recent alleged missile attack on a Navy ship in the Gulf of Aden perfectly matches the fraudulent Gulf of Tonkin incident that kicked off the Vietnam War. Yes, indeed, it is a furious pace that I keep, but believe it or not, I do it because I don't believe in phoning it in. I want to post as many of my thoughts on the issues of the day as I can. And not to be morbid, but I do it because nobody's promised tomorrow. I want to make sure that my viewpoints, or at the very least my way of looking at the world, are available for people to see and hear. I want to make sure that I sound off on as many significant topics as possible, the ones that I feel are the most pertinent to my people. Putting out content 6 days a week works for me, and I think it works for you too. I hope that these briefings serve not as merely some summary of the day's events which you can get anywhere, but rather as a digital archive and knowledge bank of these events and what they truly mean. A compilation of the forces and the people that we're up against, so you can be armed with the knowledge you need to win the war against white supremacy. A lot of people say, if I've helped just one person, then I've done my job. Well, to me, that's nowhere near sufficient. That's false piety as far as I'm concerned. It's someone whose message and mission must not be very important if one person is all it takes for them to feel that their time and effort was justified. I don't believe in putting the bar on the ground. I don't consider my job done unless the whole world agrees with me, or at least a large portion of it. So, from that vantage point, I've got a hell of a long way to go, but it's fine by me because thanks to all of you, I know I don't have to take the journey alone, no matter how difficult it is or how long it takes. We are truly all in this together. I want us to reach as many people as possible with our message, but it's far more important to me that we reach the right people, the ones who are on the same wavelength, the ones who are going to get the job done. It takes time, it takes effort, but my people are worth it, and I know that when I'm working, you guys are right alongside me. I sincerely hope that you have gotten something meaningful from this. As I've often said, if you weren't here, I wouldn't be here. So, here's to the Moment of Truth number 500. Please don't ask me how many Sunday addresses I've done. And to mark the occasion, I've decided to do a crime report that I hope will get your day off to a good start. It's a story about a corrupt good old boy cop who almost got away with it. And now the Friday Crime Report. Shreveport, Louisiana, Monday, August 5th, 2019. I'm sure that by now you've probably heard more than once that Louisiana is a hotbed of racist cops. The corruption and bigotry of Louisiana law enforcement is the stuff of legend, and I don't mean that in a good way. We covered a few weeks back how the Baton Rouge police had a torture dungeon they called the Brave Cave, where they would take black citizens who they arrested, often without reason, and then beat them and torture them under the pretense that they were drug dealers. This taxpayer-funded torture chamber was operating for a decade before the thugs and blues activities there became so egregious that they couldn't be covered up anymore. But of course, no one's been punished. There's evil everywhere, it's true, but in the dirty South, especially places like Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, the racists are particularly venal and demented. In 2019, one of these degenerates, Dylan Hudson of the Shreveport Police Department, came to a liquor store in response to an alleged loitering complaint. He was joined by 2 other gun-toting punks in the Shreveport PD. The cops accosted and attacked a black man, Markeel Tyson, allegedly for urinating in public and trespassing. But rather than simply arrest him, the inbred punks in Shreveport did just like the police who murdered Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. They decided to beat him instead, even though Mr. Tyson gave absolutely no resistance. So all 3 of them, led by the punk Hudson, began punching Mr. Tyson in the face and head, kneeing him in the stomach, tasing him in the neck and head, pistol whipping him in the head, slamming his head into the ground and kicking him in the face. Mr. Tyson sustained significant injuries from this gang beating. After this assault, they actually charged their victim, Mr. Tyson, with resisting an officer, even though he gave no resistance. This beating actually made it into the national news, amazingly enough. 2 weeks later, Hudson was arrested on state charges of malfeasance and put on paid leave, so that meant that the taxpayers of Louisiana had to give this animal a paid vacation. The warrant against him didn't describe what it was he was being accused of doing. This is typical in Louisiana and much of the South. The headlines at the time claimed that he was arrested on a felony, but as we all know, racial privilege guarantees that any charges will inevitably be reduced. Now that was in August of 2019, but the state charges never went anywhere. And after the breakout of the COVID virus, all the legal proceedings were delayed by a year. But I'll save you the suspense, and nothing ever came of the state charges of malfeasance against him. There was supposed to be a trial in September of 2021, but it's obvious it was buried, which had been the plan all along. About all that happened to him was he was eventually fired by the Shreveport police. Though that's not where it ends. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. After numerous demands from the public and the media attention that this beating received, Jim Crow Joe's Injustice Department actually investigated this case. And no-brainer, they had this violent thug indicted on a federal charge of depriving Mr. Tyson of his right to be protected from unreasonable force during an arrest. Unfortunately, Mr. Tyson would never get the chance to testify against the criminal who attacked him. He died in a traffic accident on November 11th of last year. Hudson was tried in federal court the very next month, and in that trial, after 24 hours, the jurors told the judge they couldn't reach a verdict. Now, we all know what that means. There was some stealth juror who got in, some fellow racist reprobate who refused to vote to convict. Now, this was only the first 24 hours of deliberation. Typically, a judge would order the jurors to continue deliberating, even if they claimed that it wouldn't change the outcome. But this is a case where a black man is assaulted by a white cop, so the judge immediately declared a mistrial. Hudson's lawyers were ecstatic. As they saw it, racial privilege would be enough to keep this hooligan out of prison, and since he had no felonies, he would be able to go quickly join some other police or sheriff's department and resume his life of crime. But not so fast. The Injustice Department, astonishingly, refiled the case and put Hudson on trial a second time. He went back on trial in June of this year, and this time he was easily convicted. He was supposed to be sentenced in October, but in a bit of poetic irony, his sentencing was postponed until November. Yesterday, he was sentenced to 21 months and 3 years of supervised release. That's a far cry from the 10-year maximum sentence that he should have gotten. It was a felony, though, so that means he can join Jason Van Dyke, Amber Geigers, Michael Slager, Derek Chauvin, and the rest of the trash in never being able to practice their racism from behind a badge ever again. I guess they'll all have to settle for joining Kyle Rittenhouse on the streets from now on. But what we want is for the punishment to fit the crime. These racist, corrupt judges ignore the law and give lowball sentences to these criminals because they have an unwritten rule that they don't give white supremacists who attack black people more than 2 years for an assault and no more than 5 years for murder. This is in direct opposition to the law. These judges have to be held accountable for the sentences they hand down. But in the meanwhile, the white supremacists have taken another L. And the police message boards are full of the same predictable whining. They're all criminals and they hate seeing incarceration be the new normal for police criminality, because they know that if it can happen to these other thugs, it can happen to them too. But the mistrial actually makes this even better, believe it or not. That creep thought that he had dodged a bullet last year. He thought he got his neck out of the noose. After the judge declared a mistrial, I'll bet you he was already polishing off his resume and looking for the next police department that he would apply to. As we saw with Betty Shelby, murdering a black person is a resume enhancer. He was just so sure that he was going to get away with it. But he didn't get very far. Now he'll be cooling his heels in a cage where he belongs, and after that, having someone looking over his shoulder like the criminal he is. Not only will he not be able to get behind a badge ever again, there's also a lot of other jobs that he won't be eligible for either. His life prospects have been greatly narrowed, and like every other decent person, I hope this worm's remaining days are frustrating and difficult. I'll enjoy the thought of him spending the remainder of his life, such as it is, asking himself if his racial violence was really worth it. Markeel Tyson died a year ago. It's poetic justice that his assailant was sentenced to prison exactly a year later to mark the occasion. Now, who says God doesn't have a sense of humor? And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Joel Hunton, Sharon Shabala, Wally Bilal, Jeffrey Williams, and Terrence. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.